It is June 12th, 2026, and I am interviewing Mr. Kevin Fischer. Hello.
Good afternoon, sir.
So, if you could tell us a little bit about your background with NAMI and your shirt, Everybody versus Sigma.
So, I am Kevin Fischer. I carry multiple titles. I am the State Executive Director for NAMI Michigan, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is the nation's largest grassroots mental health advocacy organization. I am also the President and CEO of EverybodyVersusStigma.com, an organization that my wife Sonia and I formed in 2021 to address the stigma associated with behavioral health care disorders, which we believe is the leading barrier to the early diagnosis and treatment that lead to better outcomes. So, how did I get here? I guess I like to call it the hard way. In 2007, my oldest son, Dominique, at the age of 20, was diagnosed with serious mental illness. Dominique was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, which came as a complete surprise to our family. Prior to that, Dominique had not exhibited symptoms of mental illness to us. He was away at college at John Carroll University just outside of Cleveland, and for what his mother and I knew, doing very well. Dominique had a 3.8 grade point average. Coming out of high school, he was a three-sport athlete. I don't believe any kid is perfect, but he was absolutely perfect for us. He was a good kid. He caused us very little trouble, and again, had not exhibited symptoms of mental illness. So initially, we thought maybe he went off to school and experimented with drugs. So we took him to a local hospital to be drug tested, and after a lengthy exam, the doctors informed us that there were no drugs or alcohol in his system, but that they were going to put him on a 72-hour psychiatric hold, which again came as a complete surprise to us. We learned very quickly how little, not only we as parents, but as the society is, about mental illness, what mental illnesses are, what it means, what does bipolar disorder really mean, what does schizophrenia really mean, what was he experiencing, how could we help him, what was the importance of continuity of care, the medications, all of those things were really foreign to us, and so it took us some time to get our arms wrapped around it. So, understanding Dominique's treatment plan was really difficult for us. We didn't understand the medications, really what he was experiencing, how we could be better caregivers, and so it was a learning curve. And I will say that as difficult as it was, Dominique pretty much did everything we asked him to do. Wasn't always easy, but he'd take his medication, he'd go to therapy, and he stayed focused on his dreams and his goals. He wanted to return to school. He wanted to finish school. He didn't want the diagnosis to stop him. But of course, there were a couple bumps along the road. And it led me in 2009 to stop working and become his full-time caregiver. At that time, his mom and I had been divorced for a couple of years. I was in a new relationship, and my current wife, Sonia, and I became his primary caregivers. So he lived with us and our two children from her first marriage. Things seemed to be going well until this thing we call stigma crept in. And stigma's powerful. Stigma, in my opinion, can kill. And I think stigma cost Dominique his life. Dominique, as I mentioned before, was participating in his treatment plan. But when friends and family found out about his diagnosis, there were people who I know loved him, had absolutely no malicious intent, but would say things to him like, don't let anybody tell you you're crazy, don't take that medication, you don't know what's in it. Those kinds of things weigh heavily on people who live with mental illness. And I believe Dominique succumbed to that stigma. It wasn't long after that he stopped taking his medication, that he stopped participating in his treatment plan, and he started self-medicating with marijuana and alcohol. Unfortunately, 3 months after that came to my attention, we lost Dominique to suicide on June 27th of 2010. As you can imagine, that was life altering and life shaking for me and my family. Obviously, there's a profound sense of loss and guilt and misunderstanding that comes with that. For me as a father, it was very difficult, frankly, because I felt like I failed him. I felt like I wasn't there for him. I felt like I failed God. I felt like I failed his mom, and everybody else involved. And so, almost immediately after losing him, I slipped into a depression, obviously grief driven and others, but I was angry, I was grieving, and frankly, I didn't want to live anymore. And when I say that, I want to be clear because it wasn't that I wanted to die. It just got to a point that the emotional pain and grief of losing him was so overwhelming that I didn't think I could handle. I couldn't handle it every day. So, approximately 6 months after Dominique's passing, I started planning my own death. And I want to be clear about that. It wasn't that I wanted to die. It was that I just didn't feel like I could live with the emotional pain that I was experiencing every day. And so I started the classic process of planning my suicide. I got my legal affairs in order. I set valuable things aside that I wanted my children to have. I married my girlfriend, who is now my wife, and was a caregiver to Dominique in the last couple of years. I did the things that I thought I needed to do to, as best I could, provide for the people that I would leave behind. I am grateful that I did not carry that plan out. Literally on the day that I planned to take my life, my wife really surprised me. It was normal for me to visit Dominique's gravesite alone, and I would do so weekly. But on the anniversary of the date that Dominique passed, that was the day that I planned to take my life, and I planned to go visit his gravesite and not come back. Little did I know, my wife was very conscious of what the date was as well, and so she planned to take the day off to spend it with me because she didn't want me to spend it alone. So I remember quite vividly, again, having my affairs in order, had my plan, realized that morning that she wasn't preparing to go to work. And so I asked what her plan was that day. And she says, well, I'm going to spend the day with you. And I said I didn't think that was a good idea, that it was going to be a really tough day. And she said, I know, that's why I'm going to spend the day with you. And after I pushed back a number of times, she finally made it clear, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, I'm going to spend the day with you. I won't allow you to spend today alone. So we visited Dominique's gravesite, and I took my lawn chairs and my Bible as I normally did and prayed and cried and cried and prayed. And at some point, I told God, I clearly won't do this while she's here, but I can always come back tomorrow. And God spoke to me and said, look, you asked me for help and I sent it. You take her hand and you believe that I am God and God alone, and you will get through this. And throughout my life, I've always had my own little conversations with God, and I've always believed that God showed me incredible favor. But in this instance, there was a but, and it was Kevin, this is not the end of your life. This is going to be a beginning. And that led me ultimately to this life of advocacy. It led me to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, who I didn't know anything about prior to that. Sonia discovered NAMI for me on the internet. She did not know that I was experiencing suicidal ideation, but she knew I was struggling. And she had known that I stopped going to therapy, and she's a helper. So she discovered NAMI on the internet one day, and she said, I think you should look into this organization. Maybe they can help you, and maybe you can help yourself by helping others. So I joined NAMI. I attended my first family-to-family meeting in in early 2011, and I'm sorry, that's wrong, in late 2011. And immediately, NAMI felt like family to me. These were people who really understood what I had gone through, and was a great support to me. So, started as a volunteer. One thing led to another. The local affiliate president suggested that maybe I join the board of directors. Yep. The local affiliate president suggested that I volunteer to be on the board of directors. That led me to serving as the NAMI Walks, which is the mental health awareness walk that we host, the NAMI Walks chair for 2 years. And then in early 2014, there became a vacancy at the executive director position, something that I never considered doing, but there was a need and I was available. And because of the financial situation the organization was in, we weren't in a great position to pay an executive director. So I volunteered to do so on an interim basis, which 12 years later, I'm still there, but I consider that part of the calling. NAMI, NAMI enriched my life. NAMI gave me a sense of purpose. The advocacy gave me a sense of purpose. And one thing just continued to lead to another. And I started gaining a better understanding and what some people would call now becoming a subject matter expert on behavioral health care, advocacy, and the impact that stigma has on people's lives. In early 2020, during the height of the pandemic, I became extremely frustrated with what was happening nationally, specifically to young people, but the impact that the pandemic was having on everyone's mental health. We were losing more young people to suicide. There were more national stories about children experiencing more episodes of mental illness as a result of the social distancing, not being able to go to school, not being able to see their friends, not being able to go to Friday night football or prom. And so my wife, Sonia, had previously started a t-shirt business. And one of the shirts she had made for me in 2017 said, "Everybody versus Stigma." And it was a part of our NAMI Walks team. It was our theme for that year. We never really planned to sell the shirts or do anything with them. It was just the theme for the walk that year. But during the pandemic, it really became apparent to me the impact that stigma was having on preventing people from seeking the help that they needed as well. So I asked my wife to, let's pull Everybody versus Stigma back out, because it's easy to say you are not alone, but when you're a person living with a mental health diagnosis or you're a caregiver, the stigma is extremely isolating and it's overwhelming, and it doesn't matter how many millions of people you hear are also impacted by mental illness, you feel alone. So that was the basis for why we started and trademarked Everybody versus Stigma. And we didn't do it just to sell shirts. We never started it to make money at all. Everybody versus Stigma has become what I intended it to be originally. It is a movement. It is a movement to show individuals who are impacted by behavioral health care disorders, not just mental illness, but substance use disorder, intellectual and developmental disabilities, people who experience suicidal ideology, and even people who are on the autism spectrum. It is to let them know that they're truly not alone. In 2014, when I assumed the responsibility as the interim executive director for NAMI Michigan, I truly didn't intend for it to last more than 4 to 6 months. My goal was to help the organization gain some financial stability and then just turn it over to someone else. Frankly, I didn't think I was yet in the state of mind where I thought I was employable. But this advocacy and the sense of family and the sense of need for NAMI just kind of took over. And it became a driving force in my life. The more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. And the more I saw the impact we could have on the quality of people's lives, not just the people who live with behavioral health care diagnoses, but the impact that we could have on their families, their caregivers, and literally the community as a whole. I never envisioned becoming a public person. I never envisioned this life of advocacy, and I'm not always comfortable with it, but I do it out of necessity. I do it because I saw the need and I continue to see the need. And the longer that I've been in this role, the more passionate I've become about the simple opportunity to help other people. This has also led me to, and this is as a result of Dominique's illness as it related to his interactions with law enforcement. Most people in the public don't understand that it is an unfortunate reality that a person's mental illness can cause you to become involved with the criminal justice system. To my knowledge, for example, Dominique only had 2 interactions with law enforcement. One went well, one not so well. And as a result of that, it led me to learn about a organization called Crisis Intervention Team Training. No, let me say that again. Crisis Intervention Team International, which is an organization that was partly started by NAMI in Memphis, Tennessee back in 1988. And it was because we recognized that our law enforcement officers didn't receive enough de-escalation training that's necessary when you're engaging with people who live with who are experiencing behavioral health crisis. So we started that in collaboration with the Memphis Police Department and the University of Memphis, which wrote the original curriculum for what we now know to be the CIT, or Crisis Intervention Team International curriculum, which is also known as the Memphis Model. And this is important to me, and I'll share with you what I call a tale of 2 cities. It's the 2 interactions that I knew that Dominique had with law enforcement as a result of his mental illness. In 2007, I believe it was, nope, I'm sorry. In 2008, Dominique was living off campus, attending John Carroll University in University Heights, Ohio. Dominique was raised to believe that law enforcement was there to help in time of need. And it happened on one day that Dominique was in crisis. He was walking from his off-campus house to campus, and the University Heights police were executing what I'll refer to as a routine traffic stop. Dominique was on foot. They had a vehicle pulled over that had absolutely nothing to do with him. But Dominique knew he was in crisis. He was off his medication. And while those officers were tending to the vehicle they had pulled over, Dominique walked up to the patrol car, just opened the door, and got in. And he did so because of what he had been taught as a child. The police are there to help you in time of distress. However, we know that's not normal behavior. And that's something that could have gone badly for Dominique. I am very grateful, even today, to the University Heights police officers for the way they managed that situation. They showed Dominique respect and compassion. They showed me respect and compassion as a father, though I was 5.5 hours in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The officer called me from the scene, explained to me in detail that what had occurred, explained to me that Dominique had committed no crime, he was in no trouble, but they believed he was experiencing a mental health crisis and that they were going to transport him to a local hospital. The officer subsequently followed up with me to make sure that Dominique was okay when I arrived at the hospital. And I remember being so grateful that I wrote the chief of police a thank you letter and just simply said, thank you for caring for my child in a really difficult situation that could have gone horribly wrong. Dominique came home, was back into treatment, and was doing so well that his doctors recommended that we allow him to go back to school because, again, Dominique wanted to complete his degree, as many people do. Most people, and I'm going to pause and say this, most people who don't understand people who live with behavioral health care diagnosis tend to forget that we all still share the same dreams, hopes, aspirations. Dominique wanted to be a productive member of the community. He wanted to complete his degree. He wanted to have a profession. He wanted to have a family. He had all the hopes and dreams that we all share. I was skeptical about him returning to school. I was, as his father, concerned because we didn't have a real support system there. We didn't have family in Cleveland. All he had was his teammates from the football team and, of course, the other students on campus. We did have a counselor who befriended him and helped me kind of monitor Dominique while he was there. He would visit her office every day just so she could make sure he was okay. And then I would drive down either every weekend or every other weekend because I wanted to see him in person and make sure he was okay. And he did well during the spring and summer semester. The problem he encountered was in the fall when the campus was full again and his teammates were back, and he, once again, didn't want them to know he was taking medication for mental illness. So he stopped taking his medication and he experienced another crisis. And at this time, the voices in his head directed him to attend a Cleveland Browns football game at 5 o'clock in the morning. Well, it was Monday Night Football, so the game wasn't going to be played until 9 o'clock that evening. Dominique, of course, was not quite himself, so he didn't take a wallet, he didn't take money with him. Somebody gave him bus fare, and he was at the stadium all day. At some point, he got hungry, and he took a hamburger or a hot dog off a tailgater's grill. The city of Cleveland police were called. And when they arrived, they weren't as understanding and compassionate. And understand, I know law enforcement has certain tactical training and standards that they adhere to. But unfortunately for Dominique, they didn't understand or recognize that he was experiencing a behavioral health crisis. So he was arrested and charged with being drunk and disorderly and resisting arrest. Those charges were later dropped because he wasn't under the influence of drugs or alcohol. He was experiencing a psychiatric crisis. But the thing that concerned me the most was the resisting arrest charge. Because frankly, Dominique was not that kind of person who was going to fight a police officer. So when I saw him in the Cuyahoga County Jail several days later, my first question was, tell me about the resisting arrest charge. And his immediate response was, Dad, I thought they were there to hurt me. And what he meant was police officers gain and maintain control of scenes by shouting commands. Freeze, put your hands up. Get on your knees. Put your hands behind your head. But those kinds of commands when a person is experiencing a behavioral health crisis come across as threatening to those individuals. Their fight or flight kicks in very differently. And so what the officers were doing in following their training came across as a threat to Dominique. So Dominique was not trying to engage or confront the officers. He was trying to flee what he perceived a risk to himself. So part of the training that we provide in the crisis intervention team training is an exercise called Hearing Voices. And it mimics as best we could for the law enforcement officers what it would be like for a person who's living with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or experiencing a behavioral health crisis. And I have found that that has been eye-opening for law enforcement officers who don't understand that the training they receive in the academy would suggest to them that if a person doesn't follow their commands, that they're being defiant. They now understand after this training that that individual may not be defiant. They understand that that person may not be able to follow those commands when they're experiencing that crisis. So that and a number of other resources we provide to law enforcement during the crisis intervention team training helps them better understand how to identify a person who's in crisis, possible side effects of medications, what resources are available for individuals who are experiencing crisis, and how they can better serve those individuals in the community by directing them to resources rather than to jail or harming them. I'm going to go in a little different direction here and just talk about Dominique and what we're doing today. Dominique was a driving force in my life before he was ever born. I remember telling my dad when I was 14 that I wanted to be a father because of the type of father he was. And I remember my dad cautioning me and say, son, slow down. You're 14 going on 40. You need to just let life take care of itself. But I wanted to be a dad. Dominique is my firstborn child, and he helped me mature into manhood, that responsibility. I didn't realize you could love another person so much. And I will say that his mom and I tried to give him the best life we knew how, not just material things, but environment, making sure he felt safe and had the basics of life. It was heartbreaking to see how people responded to him after they learned of his diagnosis. And again, this is why the Everybody versus Stigma movement is so important to me. It's not that I think people had a malicious intent. I know his friends and family loved him. But to watch how, frankly, people distance themselves away from him when they learned about the mental illness. Some might say turn their back on him. To see Dominique almost begging friends to spend time with him, who he had been a great friend to prior to his diagnosis, was heartbreaking to me as a father. Knowing that he was very aware of that, I remember one day him telling me, I understand I have this illness, but I'm no less intelligent than I was before the diagnosis. Dominique understood how people saw him, and he understood how it changed the way they treated him. And it was hurtful. It was hurtful to see my son cry because his friends didn't want to spend time with him. And again, Sonia and I tried to make him feel whole and welcome. And our two younger children from Sonia's first marriage, they welcomed him as a big brother. They enjoyed him as a big brother. But there was still something missing. And it's heartbreaking to know that he left this world feeling less than. And that's what drives me every day. I don't do this work for Dominique. Dominique's gone. I can't do anything for him. It's for everybody who's here still living with mental illness that I fight for. Because I don't want them to feel the way I know he felt. And I'll also add how difficult it is to be a caregiver. It's challenging. It's really tough to make tough decisions for somebody you love, knowing that they may not understand it or appreciate it at the time, but you're doing the best, what you believe is best for them. I was having a conversation very recently about the couple of occasions that I would have to take Dominique to a behavioral health crisis center. One of the hardest decisions I've ever made. Sometimes I told him that's where we were going because I was concerned about his safety and the safety of everybody around him. There were one or two times, quite frankly, I deceived him and took him there. And it was heartbreaking to see the look of betrayal on his face, for you to know your son felt like you betrayed his trust. But I never did anything to hurt him. It was always to try to help him and try to keep him safe and everybody else around him safe. The work that I do now, whether it's NAMI, Crisis Intervention Team International, Everybody versus Stigma, the individuals and families I come into contact with every day, I do the absolute best I can to make sure they're aware of the resources that are available to them, how we can prevent crises, how we can hopefully keep law enforcement out of those situations, because once law enforcement is involved, the painful truth is we no longer have control of those situations. Law enforcement takes over. And it's unfortunate sometimes that people get hurt physically, sometimes fatally. My life is devoted to trying to make sure we prevent those kinds of cases, to encourage family members and friends to support people who live with mental health diagnosis just as we would support anybody else. I find it frankly upsetting that more people are diagnosed with mental illness every year than who are diagnosed with cancer, heart disease, and diabetes combined. But we're so comfortable with that. And if a friend or coworker announces that they've been diagnosed with cancer, for example, they wouldn't be able to eat all the casseroles that they're going to receive. They're overwhelmed with love and compassion. But let that same individual come to work one day or come to church and say, I was diagnosed with serious mental illness. They're not receiving casseroles. Nobody's setting up a GoFundMe for them. No one comes to their house and check on them and say, Kevin, you okay? That's the power of stigma. And it's so unfair because mental illness is a medical diagnosis. It's not a weakness of character. It's not a weakness of faith. It's not that anyone wakes up one day and says, I want to have a mental illness or I want to have a substance use problem. Nobody does that. And we have to respond to people who live with behavioral health care challenges and support them just as we would any other, and encourage them to seek the help that they need and to maintain their treatment plan. Dominique was engaged in his treatment. I took Dominique to therapy personally 4 days a week. I quit my job and became his full time caregiver. I didn't drop him off. I took him there. And when it was my responsibility to participate in therapy with him, I did so. When he had individual therapy, I sat in the lobby. I remember a psychiatrist once telling him, I see your dad more than I see you. And what she meant was, again, I didn't just drop him off and say, I'll come back and get you. I took him and I sat there for multiple reasons. One, I wanted to make sure he was getting the help that he needed. I didn't want to drop him off at the front door and let him sneak out the back door. But equally as important, I wanted him to know that his care was as important to me as it needed to be to him, and that it was worth it for me to sit there if that's what I needed to do to show him support. We need more family members, parents, spouses, caregivers to do the same.